We are now on agenda item 9. And I'd like to hand over to our planning officer, Lisa. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Do you want me to wait?
Thank you. No, I think you should carry on. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is an application for planning permission for a first floor extension above an existing flat roof extension. An additional letter from the applicants has been circulated for members for information. This is also on the website. The design of the first floor extension as proposed, whilst an improvement on the scheme as originally submitted, is considered to be unacceptable. This is the property. In terms of its scale and design, and results in a poor relationship between the application site and the adjacent property, where the small amount of private rear garden space as well as the rear windows would be overlooked. For the reasons set out in the report, the application is considered to be unacceptable and is recommended for refusal. This is the front as existing as proposed, rear as existing as proposed, side as existing as proposed, and the ground floor existing proposed, first floor existing and proposed. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Marcus.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. It doesn't give me any pleasure in refusing planning applications because I know the work and the hopes that go with the applicant's ideas, but I just feel that there are no material planning reasons for disagreeing with the officer's reports that I can see. The design seems to not fit, in my interpretation, not fit with the existing property, existing areas, and the overlooking seems to be just too close to the existing property, the neighbour. So for those reasons, I would agree with the refusal or propose that refusal.
Thank you. Councillor Legg.
I'd agree with Councillor Marcus and the officers on that. I would, however, say that the space that this extension would fill could be filled effectively and efficiently. It seems to me as a bit of empty space, but I think the design needs to be carefully considered so that it falls within the local plan.
Thank you. Any further comment, please? Okay, well, we have a recommendation that members refuse the application as submitted for the reasons set out in the appendices. Could I have a proposer, please? Thank you, Councillor Mumford, and a seconder for that recommendation, Councillor Marcus. All those in favour? Thank you. Any against? Any abstentions? This item is refused. Thank you. So we'll now take item 10 on the agenda, household recycling services, pages 31 to 36. I'd like to hand over to Senior Officer Helen Pearce. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I've presented members of the report today with regards to the mixed recycling service that was presented to me last year. We have now progressed through to the stage of the planning implementation of that, and there's some decisions for members to make. Part of the dry mixed recycling involves householders being given clear sacks within which to place their dry mixed recycling, which is paper, card, plastic, tin cans. And The question really is whether members would like to provide those to householders for free. There is a budget impact on that, and I understand that in these times where we are looking for budget savings, that may be something that they don't have an appetite for, or whether or not they would wish to pass some of the cost of that on to householders. That's been outlined in the report, and I'd be happy to answer questions on that.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I've read through the paper carefully. It's something I feel quite strongly about. I think it's a difficult one in relation to council finances. However, in light of recent rises in council tax and the need for us to really maximise our recycling rates, I would support option C, to remove barriers to recycling. It is partly about changing habits, I think. And so for that reason, I would propose that we support the recommendation.
Councillor Grottick.
Thank you, Chairman. I just have a question, please. As one travels over the country and stays with friends, you usually find that they have quite robust recycling bags to put out their recyclables, which are then returned to the house and are used every week. And I believe it's said that if we do that here, the recycling may get wet, but surely it's not beyond the grounds of possibility to actually find something with a lid or something that would cover the recyclables, and that would be a more cost-effective way. I'm not sure how, but I would like to ask why that wasn't a feature of the report, please.
Part of that was due, a great part of that was due to conversations that we were having with the contractor who accepts the waste at the other end. The importance of having dry quality materials in order that it doesn't get rejected, it is down to that. What we have is a situation whereby from the point of collection, we don't have room particularly for bins out on the streets, and that was part of the TEEP analysis that was presented originally. The other consideration is that when it gets to the transfer station, Porthmelon Waste Management Site, there is multiple handling that occurs. So we have to, goes out of the vehicle. It's not as covered a facility as some of the big mainland centres would be. On top of that, we then have to containerise it into skips, which are then vulnerable to, again, the sea conditions going over on the Gree. It's then transferred again onto the back of another vehicle before it then reaches and gets sort of mingled in, bulked up with the dry mixed recycling that would happen on the mainland. So I think that the main consideration was that we wanted to protect the quality of that as far as possible so that we weren't incurring any additional costs, and we were actually able to recycle as much of that dry mixed recycling as possible. So this was in liaison with our contractor as well.
Thank you.
Councillor Marcus.
Yeah, again, anything that decreases the friction for people recycling, I think is a good idea. From the report, it says that the take-up rate, the percentage of recycling, sorry, is 34% on page 32 of the trial. What steps are in place to increase that? Because your figures are all, the figures presented are all around 40% mark for recycling. And also, there will be some households that use more than 50 sacks as well. Are we proposing that sacks are free in general, or?
Yes, so in terms of under paragraph 3, where I have picked 40%, that is with regards to where I think as a community we could reasonably reach after a period of time of a change of behaviour and of sort of becoming accustomed to the way in which the recycling takes place. So that's a little aspirational, but also it was an easy round number in which I could demonstrate what that sort of saving would look like. In terms of paragraph 4, where I've said about the average recycling diverted from residual waste, that is an actual figure, not an estimate. That's what the pilot scheme has done to date. So initially, the diversion rate was not quite as high, and that's improved. So actually, we tend to be hitting more like 40% each week now, but because of the earlier sort of the take-up was a bit slower, that's why it sort of skewed the actual down a bit for the average across then. I'm sorry, I can't remember the last question.
People that use more than 50 bags, I would put the bags are free.
So what I don't really want to commit to it right now because we haven't got quite to the actual, this is definitely what we're going to do bit. But what some authorities do who have a similar recycling scheme is that they issue a roll every 6 months, and then anybody who is, so that would cover your sort of 50 for the year, and then anyone who runs out of that in between times can just make an application or pop in and get another one. I think the idea is to ensure that they're not being used frivolously, which I'm sure they wouldn't be, but you know, it's quite often it's quite handy if you've got a sack somewhere to put something up in the attic, and really we would like people not to use it for that. So that's it really. There won't be a huge barrier. We'll try and make sure people have what they need, and anyone that needs more can apply for another one for free.
Thank you. Councillor Sims.
I think one other thing. The bags, basically, they'll go to the mainland. In the bags, they're picked up in the house. And another very strong advantage of this is that you can monitor the contents because they're clear bags. So you're not going to get, what the word, if you like, pollutants in the bag. Well, obviously, you will sometimes, but at least the guys on the ground will be able to see what's going on, and they'll be able to, and just frankly not take it.
So we do that already as part of the pilot collection. They're able to monitor what's in the sacks, and if there's food in there or obvious contamination, they don't leave it at the property because once it's contaminated, but they will divert that straight into the residual then. And we do keep a record of how many bags have been rejected at collection, and most weeks it's none. Occasionally we might get one. The worst week has been 3. So but that's clear system does work very well for that.
And Chairman, in fact, we do notify neighbours as well if we have rejected bags for the reasons why we've rejected those bags.
Councillor Molson.
Yeah, I'd like to reiterate my support for option C as we stand, but I'd like to ask a further question, is that this is only for households. Why only households and not including businesses?
We will be including businesses. They'll be able to purchase the clear sacks, commercial clear sacks, in the same way that grey sacks are purchased. At the moment, we're not able to accept commercial dry mixed recycling at the site as a bring service, purely for lack of space. We've got a transition up to the top end of the site for the compactors in a couple of weeks, and once that is in place, commercial businesses will be able to start taking to site. And once we do the initial rollout, the next phase of the rollout, any commercial customers in that area will be able to buy clear sacks as well. It's just that the cost of that is already covered, so that's not really a budget issue. We're talking about the acceptance of commercial waste at the site being within weeks? It's true. The reason I ask the question is the fact that we've got the situation coming up that the great majority of our waste is going to be from commercial rather than domestic because of the number of visitors that are here. So therefore, we're talking in terms of larger quantities of recyclables being available from commercial rather than domestic. And I would urge that we get the commercial on track as soon as we possibly can. As soon as we can, as soon as we have the room to accept that, we will. But I can't promise anything at this stage because I don't know when the compactors are going to be ready to do the compacting. On top of that, as soon as we've got that, can you communicate that to businesses, please? Absolutely. We'll be delighted to, because it will improve our diversion rates and that will make everybody feel happy. Thank you.
Councillor Watt.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I'd like to give my wholehearted support for option C. I think this council's got a lamentable record in recycling in recent years, well, not in several years. I remember 50 years ago in a previous role, I was active in dumping cars off Deep Point. Well, I'm glad we don't do that anymore. And to be honest, I think the impact on the estimated cost to the council is relatively small. And also the other aspect of it, it is reviewable in 12 months' time.
Thank you. Councillor Grottick.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I ask a quick question and then also make a comment, please? And the first quick question refers to option C, description on page 34. Do we need to review after 12 months? Wouldn't it be better to review after 6 and actually see how things were going? Or do you feel you need the year to really make an evaluation?
My view is that because of the peakiness of the season, and within this next 6 months, we will see the bulk of our waste. It will be the big bit. It won't give us an opportunity to see what happens in the winter as well.
Fair enough.
So that
Fair
would be
enough.
my view, just to have a bit, have that full arc of the year available.
Fine. And secondly, can you, in tandem with whatever we decide, can you also redouble your efforts to make sure that businesses that should be purchasing grey waste bags actually do? And can we also give some thought to how we approach, for example, the gig championships, where an enormous amount of refuse is generated, of course, and yet my understanding is they're not asked to pay for grey sacks. I know they contribute a huge economic benefit to the island, but then so do other facility, so do a lot of other arrangements. And so I think we really ought to redouble the efforts to actually make sure that people purchase the grey bags they should be purchasing.
I think the only issue with something like that event is that people are using public litter bins, and that sort of is the role of a public litter bin. And when we have a tourist season, it's generally more busy or not. I think certainly my experience and my knowledge of the purchase of the grey sacks is, and the collection protocols around that, is that it's pretty, I don't think we have a problem with commercial customers purchasing commercial sacks. I think everybody is doing that, just to reassure members.
Councillor Mumford.
Could I just ask, Helen, if anybody can monitor people putting their domestic rubbish into the bins on Porth Cresser and outside the toilets there, because they're obviously filling those bins up rather than using their grey bags or whatever.
I think there may be some confusion about which are properties which are required to pay for commercial sacks and which aren't. And can I just reiterate that if a property is paying council tax, it is not required to purchase grey sacks, regardless of whether or not somebody's operating a business from that or not. So if it's a self-catering property which is paying council tax rather than non-domestic rates, then they're not required to buy grey sacks. And I want to make that really clear, because I think sometimes that's where the perception that people aren't buying sacks comes from. In terms of the litter bins and the use of that, I can certainly ask people to have a look and to keep an eye on that. And I would just encourage anyone that if they do witness somebody who they think shouldn't be putting litter in those bins, we would prefer to hear that at the time so that we can investigate it straight away. That would be really useful to us.
Thank you. Councillor Sims.
Just a brief comment, because I was just reminded of it. Not directly related to this, but is it possible to put another public bin at the top of Little Porth, because it's always absolutely chock-a-block?
I will ask.
Thank you. Councillor Legg.
I welcome option C and the prospect of passing some of our savings onto households. I think that's a good way forward for the council in general. I would second Councillor Smith's proposal for option C. So.
Thank you. Well, we have a proposal to take the recommendation to approve option C. We have a proposer and a seconder. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. Agenda item 11. I'd like to welcome our 151 officer, Russell Ashman, and hand over to you, Russell. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like this opportunity to give members an update on where we are on the outturn for the last financial year. I think you probably all recall that last year you didn't get the outturn until very late in the year. I think it was October time. The statutory deadline these days is now the 31st of May, but we were always aware that this year we would not be meeting the 31st of May, and we had that agreement with the external auditors. And the external auditors are not expecting to come and do that work until September, as they're not expecting to get the accounts until late July, early August.
So that was the plan that we had put in place earlier in the year, that we would still miss the deadline and probably wouldn't get the accounts done until the end of July. I was rather hoping that I could actually present today a very high level report with the actual outturn on, because we were very, very close to actually being able to complete the exercise well ahead of schedule. Unfortunately, there's still a few numbers moving around even this afternoon, which I just didn't want to actually put that on paper and get committed to it at the moment. But we're probably within a few days of actually nailing the outturn now. The final accounts will probably follow within about 2 weeks of that, so I'm quite confident that by the end of June we will have completed the outturn and got the final accounts done, which is well ahead of last year, about 4 months ahead of last year, and ahead of what our external auditors and external stakeholders were expecting this year. So I think that's good news. In terms of the actual position, what I can say is that in the February report we forecast a underspend of about 200,000. At the moment, and as I say, there is caveats because there is still stuff moving around and there might be something that comes out first thing tomorrow morning, but it looks like our underspend will be in the region of about 140,000. So a little bit less of an underspend than anticipated at the end of February, but probably not unexpected, as things do. Extra costs do tend to come out of the woodwork and provisions are made in the last month of the year. If that is the underspend at the end of the year, the likelihood is that we will use that to put into general reserve to repay some of the money that we've withdrawn from the general reserve this year to support the budget and try and keep and maintain our reserves at a reasonable level. I think, having caveated it, I'd also like to say that because we've got an underspend as compared with an overspend in last financial year, I don't think we're out of the woods yet, and you can say that we've got full control back in place. But I think we can say is the first element of getting control has been achieved, which is really quite a draconian cut-off in expenditure. So when you tend to have a loss of financial control, your first action is to turn the tap off, so as to speak, and sort of stop all unnecessary expenditure, run a number or a higher level of vacancies than you should do, really. But it's all about, let's just stop spending, cut out everything you possibly can for the moment, let's bring the spend down and get a semblance of control back in place. Obviously, that position is not sustainable in the long term. So the plan is usually get that initial control, then make sure the control environment is then put in place so that it's sustainable going forward, which that's the piece of work that we've done in the last 6 months in bringing in the new financial systems. There'll be a culture change. Those systems have got to bed down yet, so there's some time still to go. But once they do bed down, we get those controls back in place. You then turn the tap back on a gradual basis, keep those controls, keep the monitoring in place, and hopefully we can get back to a place where full financial control is achieved and spending is controlled on a sustainable basis going forward. So I think we're making good progress. We're heading in the right direction. Still work to do. The final outturn will be available much earlier than we anticipated. I anticipate that we'll give an update in the next full council meeting alongside the first monitoring report for the new year. So in the July meeting, we'll bring an update where we are on the outturn as part of that monitoring report for the first 2 months of the current financial year.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank the 151 officer for this risk assessment. It's a good bit of work, this, and interesting.
That's the next one.
Sorry, I'm one ahead of myself. Apologies. I'll address that in a minute.
Okay. Are there any questions for our 151 officer, please? Councillor Molson.
Yeah, we've gone from a projected underspend of 200 to projected underspend of 140 within a fairly short space of time. Have you got any indications of where that variance is coming from or not?
I do have, but we're doing some final checking before I commit myself to making that statement in a public meeting. But yes, we've got analysis done. We are just double checking that with senior managers before I make that comment.
It's just that I understand why you don't want to make it public in a public meeting, but could you share that amongst councillors before the next meeting on the ground that it is a significant lump within a very short space of time?
Yes, we can do. I think we'll bottom it out in probably the next 7 days. So after that, we'll share it around via the chair and vice chair, and then get it around the rest of the members.
Thank you. Any further questions, please? Thank you very much for that report, Russell. We will now move on to item 12, the council savings plans risk assessment, pages 37 to 56, also in your hands.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is as a result of a request in a previous full council meeting to have a look and do a risk assessment of the council savings plan. You probably recall that in February, when you set the budget, you set a budget with a set of savings plans in there of totaling just under £216,000. So I went away, worked with senior managers and had a look at how can we put something in and measure the risk around whether the savings will be delivered, and get that down on paper in some way that can be understood and as a measure. So we're looking at it. I looked at whether there is sort of how deliverable are the savings. And when you're looking at how deliverable are the savings, I picked 6 questions or 6 tests to do. And that is planning, i.e. is there a plan in place? Is it being developed? Is it in place? Is there no plan? Are all the necessary approvals in place, i.e. whether there's further member approval needed for something, or is there an approval from a third party stakeholder, etc. needed? Consultation, is there a consultation needed with, again, a stakeholder or even a public consultation? Staffing, if you're reducing staffing, is there a formal process to start with the unions or on any sort of staff reduction? Contracts, does it require a renegotiation, termination, or even a revised contract? And investment, does it require any investment? And I think those things are 6 tests, and I think there's probably more that you can probably sit down and think about, but this is a sort of a starting point to start because we didn't have anything in place. Feeling is if those 6 questions are answered, either positively or negatively, gives you an idea of whether you think the savings will be delivered. If there's a plan in place, and you've got most of your approvals in place, and you've got the money in place, if there's investments, etc., the chances are it will be delivered. If no one's got a plan in place and nothing else has been started, and yet it's all needed, the chances are it won't be. So that was the basis of doing it. So we then scored them based on is the plan and the approvals in place? Are they being worked on in progress? Has it not started? Or is it not applicable? I.e., if the savings don't have any impact on staffing, then you wouldn't actually require any staff consultation. We developed a scoring around that, and again, a little bit subjective in the starting point, but 1 for low risk, 3 for medium, 5 for high, and 1 if it's not applicable. And then not only that, we then looked at the overall risk score for savings and then decided that when you've added the scores up in total for the 6 tests, what does the overall score say? If it's less than 13, it's probably low risk. Between 13 and 18, medium. Greater than 19, high risk. By doing that, we then obviously worked out whether risks were low, medium or high. We can then put a factor of what we think, a probability factor of deliverability. So if it's low risk and everything's in place and everything is green, the chances are it should deliver. So we should assume that 100% of the savings will be delivered. If it's medium risk, so there are still some obstacles to overcome, we assume that about 2/3, 66% of the savings will be delivered. If it's high risk, i.e. quite a considerable element of the work needed is yet to start or is not in progress, deem it to be high risk, although it can still happen and still be delivered and be caught back up, the chances are it won't, and therefore only about 15% of savings would be delivered. When we actually put that through and did that test against the savings plan of 216,000, we came up with 8 savings that were deemed to be green or low risk, 3 savings that were amber, medium risk, and 2 that are high risk, i.e. red. Then based on using that calculation, means that about 167,000 of the original 216,000 is probably deliverable. Now, that's a starter for 10 really as a process. There was no process in place. We've designed the process, gone through it with the senior management team. The results are set out in the tables that follow. There's a summary on the first page with the figures, and the second page has got what I call a savings wheel of risk. If you've got it in colour, the idea is that the plan is that in a perfect world, that whole wheel is green. But you'll see it obviously isn't, but the target is to get that green. And you can go through each of these. I don't anticipate reading through these line by line. You can do that yourselves. But I say, having had nothing in place, we've now put something in place to try and measure the risk around the savings. We'll refine that as we go forward. I anticipate, I've discussed this with the chair and the vice chair and lead member for finance, that although not completely got it tied up yet in my mind, but I would think that on a quarterly basis we will refresh this and bring it back to members along with other financial information. My view at the moment is that quarterly we'll bring a fuller financial report including this, and in between we'll do a sort of simpler budget monitoring report, but do a fuller report on the quarter which would include an update of this and progress against it. Really, just questions after that. Thank you.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try again. As I say, I think this is a great bit of work and very useful tool for us in terms of financial analysis. However, we should have had this in January, at the latest, before we were doing the budget setting process. We, out of necessity, had to set a balanced budget in February. It turns out it wasn't a balanced budget. We agreed to have this risk analysis at the March full council. Here we are, it's 3 months later, and to me, it really undermines the budget setting process. So in terms of the savings that we need to still make, it seems that we're in the order of 50,000 short, which I make to be sort of well over 20%. Essentially, what is the plan at the moment?
Yes, I mean, I would agree that really this should fall into the budget setting process. It should be first developed there and then monitored thereafter during the year. And yes, there is going to, by this at the moment, as a model, it shows us a shortfall of nearly £50,000. That, as I've set out in the report, that means that the managers will need to find mitigations against those undelivered savings by looking for other savings, maybe one-off savings, etc., to try and balance the budget and bring the spending back in line.
Councillor Marcus.
So will members have oversight of those one-off savings, or because we've agreed this savings figure, suddenly that gives officers carte blanche to make 50 grand's worth of other savings?
I think I would probably see that on those quarterly reports where we bring back full progress against the savings plans, we ought to set out what those alternative savings are, what those mitigations are, and make it fairly transparent. That would be my plan, and target to do that.
Brilliant. I'd just like to support this risk assessment is much clearer, and it's just kind of the fact that it wasn't part of the budget setting process is indicative of how that budget was set and the rush that everyone was under. So if this can be made part of the financial planning of the organisation, then that'll be a great step forward, I think.
Thank you. Councillor Grottick.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a welcome start point. I'm sure we all agree. I mean, we haven't had this kind of detail before, and obviously we should have had. So at least we're moving forward, and I'm very grateful for that. And I'm grateful to the 151 officers' time this afternoon when we did discuss this. The protocols are very welcome and should hopefully mean that when we look at savings in the future, we'll be able to assess whether they're really achievable in a lot more detail, and the officers will find that a lot more, hopefully, helpful as well. So I would like to add that I hope that we would also support further detailed analysis and more detail coming back to full council as and when possible. I think that's all I'd really like to say. Thank you. That this is a start, and obviously it's not perfect. There are some savings in there that are obviously weren't achievable or were very unlikely to have been achieved. But now there are a set of protocols in place. Hopefully, the next time we look at any savings, we'll be far better informed. Thanks.
Councillor Sims.
Well, I think the salient point really with this is if we had had this last year, it would have been wrong because the figures weren't there. They weren't robust enough. And I think, thank you for bringing it to us now. I don't think you could have brought it to us in January. This is probably the earliest you could have brought it. And certainly with respect to the last agenda item, we got it months earlier than last year. So I think, okay, this isn't ideal. Perhaps we should have got it in February, but perhaps we'll get it in February next year. And I think that's the whole point of all this. But one thing I did wanted to 167,000 versus 215,000, based on risk, but there is a definite possibility that some of those red areas will go to amber, possibly to green. So it's not necessarily 50,000. It may be considerably less. So I just wanted a little bit of optimism sometimes isn't amiss.
But also, consequently, the greens can go to red as well. So.
Councillor Legg, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, following on from what Councillor Sims said, I'd have concerns that we've got a plan to save £30,000 by reviewing the crewing for the fire service, and we have no plan according to this. That seems... if it was proposed that we could save £30,000 by doing that, we must have had some sort of plan, and this suggests that we don't. So is one correct or the other?
Can I chip in there, Chairman?
Councillor Molson.
Yeah, as you were aware, last year we made representations to central government over the budget that we haven't got for the fire service, and as far as I'm aware, Chairman, that is ongoing. That we're chasing £445,000 from them rather than the 25,000 that we have got within our budget at the moment. It's not a plan, but it's a start.
Chairman, if I can add to that as well, because the whole point in terms of actually reviewing the structure of the fire service was actually part of the partnership agreement with Cornwall Fire and Rescue Service. But of course, what we've found since then is that we're actually in the first tranche of the HMI inspection of fire and rescue services, and that's actually taken priority. So sometimes things fall unexpectedly, which become more of a priority than something else. And so the HMI inspection at the moment is where most of the effort and priority has been taken in terms of the fire and rescue service.
Thank you. Aisling, did you have your light on?
I just wanted to add to the fact that this is, I think it's, the whole point is that we bring to you an ongoing review of what is red, amber, green, and mitigation measures where things escalate or where things decrease in risk. Because actually this is not a definitive list of how all your senior managers are working to create efficiencies. There are lots and lots of other things that we're doing all the time. And actually when we start looking at the outturn, when you look at individual kind of service areas, you'll see that lots of things happened which weren't necessarily approved, but like, for example, the reduction in agency staff at Park House has had a significant positive impact on adult social care budgets. So that's the whole idea with budget savings. They are often ambitious, but it's reviewing how they're going over time. I don't think any planned savings in any local authority will always go as smoothly as one hoped. So I think it'd be great to get some advice from Russell about what percentage of risk you'd ever be happy with when some things are kind of, if you think about some of the kind of more long-term ideas we've had around council tax, second homeowners, those kind of things, a lot hinges on that, including kind of a change in legislation and engaging, central government. So I think we have to live with some level of risk. I think all it is that what you're seeing over the last 18 months is an increasing level of discipline and oversight from a really strong Section 151 officer function. So and that's been really, really helpful to us as senior managers, because to be honest, we've set budgets over the last 18 months with no understanding of what currently is in the books. None. No financial information, and it's almost impossible to set a budget blind, but we've had to try to do so. And bizarrely, when you look at the outturn, and I know Russell won't commit, it's amazing how pretty accurate we got to and how we have actually managed to make efficiency savings pretty much in the dark. But I really just welcome just this emerging clarity we're getting now from the strong support we're getting through this collaboration agreement. So I just think every time we have a meeting, we'll feel slightly more optimistic, just like Councillor Sims.
Councillor Sims.
Well, I'm reiterating what Aisling just said, really. If you achieve your budget savings, in a way you've undershot, because savings should be ambitious and possibly a little bit beyond the capacity of the organisation to make them. Because if you make them easily, then presumably you could make more. So I think it's reasonable to accept some latitude in not achieving all the savings.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you. Just like to ask 151 officer 2 questions. One, can you just confirm the when you would bring the savings list back to full council? Do you say every 3 months?
Yeah, I haven't quite sorted out the program, the work program that I've been looking at. I've had discussions today with the chair and vice chair, but the sort of thing I'm playing around in my own mind is having a report on a quarterly basis in more detail, which brings the savings plans, and then the 2 months in between, just having what I would deem to be a flash report on the budget monitor, quite a simple 1-page, 2-page report, but a more detailed report on a quarterly basis, which would include progress on the savings and a fuller financial report. That's what I'm toying with in my mind at the moment going forward.
And the second question was around the budget setting timetable for 2019-20. Because of this risk analysis and how that fits into the whole process, have you got the plan in place, and when would that come to us?
I'm currently working on the plan in discussions with both the Chief Executive and the Chair. The outline plan that we're putting together is that we would kick the budget setting process off in September with officers, September, October, engage members, second half of October, November, before Christmas, so that we've got a good base position before we get into the settlement timetable around the Christmas period. Then after Christmas, we can do the fine tuning based on any outcome from central government, with a view of going for a February approval. But I would hope that we have much more member involvement, probably during about November time, is what is in my mind at the moment in the timetable.
Chairman, I'd like to add in a recommendation, please, that the budget setting process for 2019-20 is brought to us in a paper for July full council. For me, it would give confidence to me in terms of just that process, that we understand it well in advance, we know what the timetable is going to be, and that's just clear to members. So I would add that as a recommendation to this proposal. Propose that, please.
Thank you. Councillor Marcus.
Yeah, I'd just like to go back to what Councillor Sims and Aisling said as well, which also refers to back to the start of the conversation about the risk and what risks we want to take as an organisation. If we find out that we are setting budgets without actual financial information, that we are doing stuff in the dark, then, like Russell said at the start, we have to have zero risk. There's to be no risk. We have to have no what's the word? You cut off the tap. You cut off the tap, basically. So to say that we do accept some risk, what I'm trying to get to is the risk appetite of the organisation is different from where it was 2 years ago to where it is now. We are more in control of the situation. I think members should be more aware and more, more cognizant of how much risks they are willing to take, and maybe put a financial percentage on that as well, which will help with these risk assessments, because then we can officers can say to us, we are 60% likely to happen. If that's the case, we're not happy with that, we don't do that. We think of another idea. So that to be more educated around the risk assessments, I think will be a good thing for the future.
151 officer.
Yeah, well, I anticipate the way that this could be used through the budget setting process is you can identify the savings, you can put them through a test, you can identify what you think is the likely amount to be delivered next year, and then you can adjust your savings plans accordingly. And then in year, you can then monitor progress against it. And if you accelerate savings, well to the good. If you get slippage, etc., at least you're in control, you've got transparency and you know what's happening. In previous areas where I've used nothing quite like this, but similar sort of medium, high, medium, low sort of scenarios, and then a probability, you then work out what you think, the level of savings are. And high risk savings, if you think they're high risk, you then, as part of the budget setting process, you have an alternative set of savings to mitigate that in the budget setting process. And you don't, obviously you need mitigations during year when stuff slips, but you also need mitigations through the planning process. And stuff is, we actually introduced in Cornwall Council a black. We went, and black was, it's just remove it. It is not going to happen. We need a replacement now. And that's how I foresee that we will use this going forward.
Councillor Molson.
Yeah, I've got a great deal of sympathy with what Councillor Smith has said, and however, I would caveat that with a timetable within a month for the budget setting process in the situation we are at the moment may not be practical. I'd just like to ask the 151 officer's opinion on that.
No, I think we could bring it back to, I had it in mind to bring it to the August meeting, but it could be done. We could bring it to July. I've got the thinking in hand, but in my mind I was going to bring it to August, but if you want it in July, that's fine. The thinking is there.
Councillor Sims.
Regarding Councillor Smith's recommendation, which I'm happy to second, it's just wanted to remind us all, really, if he'd have made that recommendation at the June council meeting last year, it would have just been ridiculous. It would have been inconceivable to have done that at that point. And just the things have improved radically in the course of the last year. And I just wanted to really remind members and anybody out there who's bothered to listen so far.
So, thank you, members. We have a recommendation that members note the risk analysis of the council savings plans. Councillor Smith has proposed that we get details of the budget setting process for our July meeting, seconded by Councillor Sims. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? It's carried. Thank you very much. The time is 7:38 and I will close the meeting. Thank you.